The coffee maker hissed and sputtered in the early morning darkness. That familiar sound that had marked the beginning of every day for as long as I could remember. It was 5:30 on a Tuesday in March, and I was standing in my kitchen in my childhood home, barefoot on the cold tile floor, waiting for the caffeine that would make the rest of the day possible. Through the window above the sink, I could see the first hint of dawn bleeding into the sky, turning it from black to deep purple. The neighborhood was still sleeping. Even the birds hadn't started yet. This was the quiet hour, the liminal space between night and morning when the world held its breath. I heard my father's footsteps on the stairs. The third step creaked. It always had, and then he appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his work clothes. Navy blue Dickies, a gray thermal shirt, steel-toed boots laced tight. His lunchbox was in his hand, the old metal kind with his name written on masking tape across the front, in my mother's handwriting from 20 years ago. He was 58 years old, and he'd been getting up at 5:15 every weekday morning since before I was born, heading to the construction company where he'd worked his way up from labor to site supervisor. "Morning," he said, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Morning, Dad," I replied, pouring coffee into his thermos. 2 sugars, splash of milk. I'd made his coffee the same way every morning for the past 6 months, ever since I'd moved back home. He took the thermos from me and paused, his hand resting on my shoulder for just a moment. It was a brief gesture, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight. My father wasn't a demonstrative man. He showed love through action, through reliability, through the steady presence of showing up day after day. The touch on my shoulder was his way of saying he was glad I was there, that it meant something to have me home again even if he'd never say it out loud. "Long day today," he said. "Foundation pour on the Riverside project. Probably won't be back until after 7. "I'll save you dinner," I told him. He nodded, grabbed his keys from the hook by the door, and left. I heard the front door close, heard his truck start in the driveway, that diesel engine rumble that was as familiar as his voice. And then the sound faded as he drove away. Another day, another dollar. The same routine we'd followed every morning since I'd come home. Licking my wounds after a failed relationship and a job that had burned me out so completely. I had to choose between quitting and having a breakdown. Coming home at 29 had felt like failure, like I was regressing, moving backward instead of forward. But my father had helped me move my boxes into my old bedroom without judgment, had cleared space in the garage for my furniture, had simply made room for me in his life without asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. We'd fallen into an easy rhythm, me handling the household tasks my mother used to do before she died 4 years ago. Him providing the steady foundation of routine and expectation that kept the days moving forward. Life before that morning had been unremarkable in its predictability. Dad left for work at 5:30. I worked from home, doing freelance graphic design for clients who didn't care where I was as long as I met deadlines. We ate dinner together most nights, watching whatever game was on or sitting in comfortable silence with our plates balanced on our laps. We didn't talk much about feelings or the past or the future. We just existed alongside each other. 2 people who'd both lost someone central to their lives and were figuring out how to keep going. My mother had been the heart of our family, warm where my father was reserved, talkative where he was quiet, openly affectionate where he was restrained. She died suddenly of a brain aneurysm, collapsing in the garden she loved while planting tulip bulbs for a spring she'd never see. My father had found her there, still holding the trowel, dirt under her fingernails. He'd called 911, performed CPR, did everything right. But she was already gone. The grief had changed him. Not dramatically, my father wasn't a man for dramatic displays, but in subtle ways. He'd become quieter, more internal. He still went to work every day, still maintained the house, still showed up for every family obligation. But there was a distance in his eyes sometimes. A faraway look that suggested he was somewhere else entirely, somewhere I couldn't reach. I'd worried about him. Those first years after Mom died, worried he'd retreat so far into himself that he'd disappear entirely. But he'd seemed to stabilize, to find his equilibrium in routine and work and the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. And when I'd shown up on his doorstep 6 months ago with my life in boxes and my confidence in pieces, he'd welcomed me without hesitation. We'd become a team of two, managing the household and our respective griefs with an unspoken understanding that some wounds don't heal so much as they become part of you. That Tuesday should have been like any other. I worked through the morning, had a video call with a client about a logo redesign, ate lunch at my desk while scrolling through social media. Around 2 in the afternoon, I remembered that I needed to check the security camera footage from the night before. We'd had issues with raccoons getting into the garbage cans, and I promised Dad I'd review the footage to figure out what time they were coming around, so we could adjust our strategy. The security camera had been my idea, installed a few months after I moved in. Just a simple System 1 camera pointed at the driveway and front walk, another covering the backyard. The footage saved to a cloud service, accessible through an app on my phone. Basic home security, the kind of thing that made sense for a house where 2 people lived alone. I opened the app and scrolled back to the previous night, looking for the timestamp when the motion sensor had been triggered. But as I scrolled through the footage, something caught my eye. A clip from that morning, time-stamped at 5:47 a.m. I clicked on it, expecting to see my father's truck pulling out of the driveway. And I did see that the truck backing out, the headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. But then, less than 3 minutes later, the truck returned. I watched as it pulled back into the driveway, watched my father get out, watched him walk to the side door that led to the garage. I felt a flicker of confusion. Had he forgotten something? His wallet, maybe, or his phone. But if he'd come back in, I would have heard him. The side door was directly below my bedroom, and I had still been awake at that hour, lying in bed scrolling through my phone before dragging myself up to make his coffee. I kept watching. My father went into the garage. 5 minutes passed, 10, 15, and then he emerged again, got back in his truck, and drove away. The timestamp read 6:14 a.m. That didn't make sense. I had made his coffee at 5:30, handed it to him around 5:35. He'd left immediately after. I'd heard the truck start, heard him drive away. But according to this footage, he'd come back. He'd spent nearly half an hour in the garage doing something I hadn't heard, hadn't known about. I rewound the clip and watched it again. Same sequence. Truck leaves at 5:47. Returns at 5:50. Stays for 24 minutes. Leaves again at 6:14. A strange feeling settled in my chest, not quite alarm, but a kind of disorientation, like when you take a familiar route and suddenly nothing looks right. I scrolled back further in the footage, checking the previous days. Monday morning, same pattern. Truck leaves, returns within minutes, stays for 20 to 30 minutes, leaves again. Sunday morning, no footage, because Sunday was his day off. Saturday, I scrolled to the morning hours and found nothing unusual, because on Saturdays he slept in until 7, his one concession to rest. Friday, same pattern. Thursday, same pattern. Wednesday, same pattern. I went back a full month, checking every weekday morning. Every single one showed the same sequence. My father left the house, doubled back within minutes, spent time in the garage, and then left for real. And I'd never noticed. I'd never heard him return. I'd never known that my hands felt cold despite the warm laptop resting on my thighs. I tried to think of innocent explanations. Maybe he was checking something in the garage. Maybe he'd been having issues with the garage door mechanism and was monitoring it. Maybe he'd been organizing his tools, sorting through the accumulated debris of decades, taking advantage of those quiet morning minutes to tackle a project he didn't want to bother me with. But none of those explanations felt right. Because if it was something innocent, something mundane, why the pattern? Why every single morning? Why the same duration, the same ritual, the same secret? I closed the laptop and sat in the silence of the empty house. The afternoon light was slanting through the living room windows, catching dust motes in the air. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly as it always did: the worn sofa where Dad sat every evening. The bookshelf full of my mother's novels that neither of us had been able to give away. The framed photos on the mantel documenting our family history. Wedding photos, baby photos, school pictures, vacation snapshots. The visual record of a normal family, a happy family. A family that had been broken by loss, but was still intact in the ways that mattered. Except now there was this secret pattern, this daily deviation from the routine I thought I understood. I told myself I was overreacting, that there was surely a simple explanation, that when Dad got home that evening, I'd ask him casually about it, and he'd laugh and explain, and I'd feel foolish for letting my imagination run wild. But even as I told myself this, I felt a thread of unease pulling tight in my chest. The hours until 7 o'clock crawled by. I tried to work, but couldn't focus. I tried to read, but the words slid past without meaning. I made dinner pot roast with potatoes and carrots, his favorites, set the table, and waited. 7 o'clock came and went. 7:30. 8. At 8:15, I texted him, "Everything okay? Dinner's ready." He replied almost immediately, "Running late. Foundation pour took longer than expected. Be home by 9. Don't wait up." I ate alone, the pot roast going cold on his plate. I washed the dishes and put his dinner in the fridge and tried to decide what I was going to say. When he got home, how do you ask your father if he's keeping secrets? How do you approach a man who's spent his entire life being steady and reliable and dependable and suggest that maybe, possibly, he's hiding something? He came home just after 9, looking exhausted. His clothes were dusty with concrete residue, his face lined with fatigue. He kicked off his boots by the door and headed straight for the shower, without much more than a grunt of greeting. By the time he came back downstairs, smelling of soap and wearing clean sweatpants and an old t-shirt, I'd reheated his dinner and had it waiting on the table. "Long day," he said, sitting down heavily. "You said," I replied, taking the seat across from him. He ate mechanically, shoveling food into his mouth without really tasting it. I watched him, this man who'd raised me, and tried to see past the familiar exterior to whatever might be hidden underneath. But he was just Dad, tired, worn out, focused on the simple act of eating after a long day of physical labor. "Dad," I said finally, as he was finishing up, "can I ask you something?" He looked up, his expression neutral. "Sure. Do you ever come back home after you leave in the morning?" Something flickered across his face, too quick to read, gone before I could identify it. "What do you mean?" I was checking the security camera footage, I said, keeping my voice casual. Looking for the raccoons. And I noticed that your truck comes back sometimes. Just for a little bit. In the mornings. The silence that followed felt heavy. He set down his fork and looked at his plate, his jaw working like he was chewing something over. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. Sometimes I forget things, he said. Come back to get them, every day. I asked gently. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere in the neighborhood. I'm not trying to pry, I said. I'm worried about you. If something's going on, if you need help with something, I want to be there for you, the way you've been there for me. He stood up abruptly, picking up his plate and carrying it to the sink. His back was to me, his shoulders tense. There's nothing to worry about, he said. I appreciate your concern, but I'm fine. Everything's fine. Dad, I'm tired. He cut me off, not unkindly but firmly. It was a long day. I'm going to bed. He left the kitchen without looking at me. I heard him climb the stairs, heard his bedroom door close, and I sat alone at the table, feeling the weight of his evasion like a stone in my stomach. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in bed replaying the conversation, analyzing his reactions, trying to understand what I'd seen in that brief flicker of expression before his guard went up. He wasn't angry. My father rarely got angry, but he'd been uncomfortable, caught, and his explanation hadn't explained anything at all. The next morning, I woke up before 5. I lay in the darkness of my room, listening. At 5:15, I heard my father's alarm go off, heard him get up, heard the shower run, heard him moving around getting ready. At 5:25, I got up and went downstairs to make his coffee like always. We moved around the kitchen in our usual routine, me at the coffee maker, him gathering his lunch and thermos, neither of us speaking much in the early morning quiet. Long day again? I asked as I handed him his coffee. Should be normal, he replied. Home by 6, okay, be safe, always AM. He left. I heard the truck start, heard it pull away, and then I went to the window in the living room and watched the street, waiting. For minutes later, I saw the headlights coming back down our street, watched his truck pull into the driveway, watched him get out and head for the garage side door. My heart was pounding. Whatever this was, it was real. It was happening right now, and I had to know. I grabbed a hoodie from the coat rack and slipped out the front door as quietly as I could. The morning air was cold, sharp against my face. I walked around the side of the house, my feet silent on the grass. The garage had a small window on the side, the glass dusty and straight. I approached it slowly, carefully, and peered through. My father was sitting on an old wooden stool we'd had forever, the kind with 3 legs that wobbled if you didn't position it just right. He was facing away from me, toward the back wall of the garage, and he was talking. I couldn't hear what he was saying through the glass, but I could see his lips moving, could see the gestures of his hands. He was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. The garage was full of the usual stuffed tools on pegboards, storage boxes stacked along the walls, his workbench covered with the organized chaos of ongoing projects. But there was nothing unusual, no one else present. Just my father, sitting alone on a stool, talking to empty air. I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't what I'd expected. I didn't know what I'd expected. Maybe evidence of financial trouble. Maybe a secret project. Maybe something that would explain the pattern without upending my understanding of reality. But not this. Not my father, always so steady and pragmatic and grounded. Sitting alone in a garage having conversations with someone who wasn't there. I watched for a few more minutes. He kept talking, occasionally nodding as if listening to responses I couldn't hear. His expression was animated in a way I rarely saw, not happy exactly, but engaged, present, like he was having a real conversation with a real person. After about 20 minutes, he stood up. He said something else. I saw his lips form words that might have been "I love you." And then he walked to the door. I barely had time to duck around the corner of the house before he emerged, got back in his truck, and drove away for real this time. I stood pressed against the side of the house, my heart hammering, my mind racing. What had I just witnessed? Was my father having hallucinations? Was this early onset dementia? Was he having some kind of breakdown that he'd been hiding from me for months? I went back inside and stood in the kitchen, my hands shaking. I needed to talk to someone. I needed advice. I called my older sister, Julia, even though it was early and she'd probably be annoyed at being woken up. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep. "This better be good." "It's about Dad," I said. That woke her up. "What's wrong? Is he okay?" I told her everything. The security footage, the pattern, what I'd just witnessed. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You're sure?" she finally asked. "You're sure he was alone? Completely alone?" Another silence. Okay, don't panic. Maybe he's just processing grief in his own way. You know how private Dad is. Maybe he talks to Mom sometimes. Maybe that's his way of coping." The suggestion landed like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Of course, that's what this was. He was talking to Mom every morning in the privacy of the garage. He was having the conversations with her that he couldn't have in front of me. It was grief. It was love. It was my father's way of maintaining a connection to the woman he'd spent 35 years with. "That makes sense," I said, feeling some of the panic recede. "That actually makes sense. But we should still keep an eye on him," Julia added. "If it's affecting his ability to function, if he's losing touch with reality, we need to know. Can you watch him? See if there are any other signs?" "Yeah," I agreed. "I can do that." We talked for a few more minutes, Julia offering reassurance and promising to come visit that weekend so she could see him herself. When we hung up, I felt marginally better. This wasn't a medical emergency. This was grief taking a particular form. And while it was concerning that he felt he had to hide it from me, I understood. My father was a proud man. He wouldn't want to burden me with the depth of his pain. But understanding didn't erase the image from my mind, my father sitting alone, speaking to empty space with an intensity that suggested the person he was addressing was as real to him as I was. Over the next few days, I watched him more carefully, looking for other signs that might indicate he was struggling with reality. But he seemed fine, normal. He went to work, came home, ate dinner, watched TV. He made jokes with the grocery store cashier. He called his brother to make plans for a fishing trip. He functioned perfectly well in all observable ways, except for those 30 minutes every morning when he returned to the garage and talked to someone who wasn't there. On Friday, I decided to check the garage myself. Dad had left for work, really left this time. After his secret morning ritual, and I went out to the garage alone. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Evidence, maybe. Some sign of what drew him there every morning. Some indication of what he was experiencing. The garage looked like it always did. Dad's workbench was cluttered with projects in various stages of completion. Tools hung on pegboards in organized rows. Storage boxes were stacked along the walls, labeled in Mom's handwriting, Christmas decorations, camping gear, old photos. Nothing seemed out of place or unusual. I walked to where I'd seen him sitting and looked around from that vantage point. What did he see when he sat here? What made this spot special? The back wall of the garage was blank except for a pegboard holding more tools. Nothing notable. Nothing that would draw someone here day after day. Then I noticed it. A small thing, easily overlooked. On the workbench, partially hidden behind a jar of old screws, was a coffee mug. Not just any mug, Mom's favorite mug. The one with the faded garden scene painted on the side. The one she'd used every morning for years. The one I'd assumed had been put away with her other things. I picked it up carefully, as if it might shatter at my touch. Inside was a thin layer of dust, evidence that it hadn't been used in years. But it was here, positioned on the workbench where my father would see it every morning when he came to sit on that stool. A tangible reminder, a focus point. I set the mug back exactly where I'd found it and left the garage feeling hollowed out. This was my father's shrine, his private place to commune with the woman he'd lost. And every morning, before facing the day, he came here to talk to her, to share things he couldn't share with anyone else, to maintain the conversation that death had interrupted. It was heartbreaking and beautiful and deeply, profoundly sad. Julia came to visit that weekend as promised. She hugged Dad extra long when she arrived, and I could see her studying his face, looking for signs of distress or confusion. But he seemed genuinely happy to see her, asking about her kids, her husband, her job. They spent Saturday afternoon working in the yard together, raking leaves and trimming bushes. Their conversation easy and natural. That evening, after Dad had gone to bed, Julia and I sat in the kitchen with glasses of wine. "He seems fine," she said. "Better than I expected. Honestly, he is fine." I agreed. During the day, it's just those mornings. Have you seen it again? The talking? No. But I checked the camera footage. It's still happening every day. Julia swirled her wine, thinking, maybe we should just let it be. If it's helping him cope, if he's not hurting anyone or himself, maybe this is okay. Grief looks different for everyone. But should he be hiding it? I asked. Should he feel like he can't talk about Mom around me? Maybe it's not about you, Julia suggested gently. Maybe it's about him needing something private, something that's just his. We don't have to understand everything about how someone grieves. She was right. I knew she was right, but it still bothered me. The secrecy bothered me. The fact that for 6 months I'd been living in this house, thinking I understood the rhythms of our shared life, only to discover there was this entire hidden dimension I'd never suspected. On Sunday morning, I woke up early again, 5 o'clock. I lay in bed listening to my father's routine alarm, the shower, the footsteps on the stairs. This time I didn't get up to make his coffee. I just listened, heard him moving around the kitchen alone, heard the truck start, heard it drive away, then return a few minutes later. I got up and went to the window, watched him walk to the garage, watched him disappear inside. This time, instead of spying through the window, I sat down on the stairs and waited. 25 minutes later, I heard the garage door close, heard his footsteps on the driveway. The truck started again, and this time when it pulled away, it didn't come back. I sat there in the morning quiet, thinking about my parents, about the marriage they'd had, not perfect, not without its struggles, but solid. built on decades of shared experience and accumulated intimacy. My mother had been the social one, the organizer, the planner. She'd managed their social calendar, maintained their friendships, dragged my father to parties and events he'd have been happy to skip. And he'd grumbled good-naturedly and gone along because she wanted to. Because making her happy made him happy. When she died, he'd lost not just his wife, but his connection to the wider world. The friends they'd had were really her friends, and they'd drifted away in the years since her death, unsure how to maintain relationships with the quiet widower, who'd never been the primary social contact. His coworkers were acquaintances, not friends. His brother lived 3 hours away. He was, I realized, profoundly lonely. And those morning conversations in the garage were the only real connection he felt to another human being. The thought broke my heart. That evening, I made his favorite dinner, a gempa roast. The same meal I'd made the night I'd first tried to ask him about the garage. We ate together in our usual comfortable silence, the TV playing quietly in the background. When he finished eating, I cleared my throat. Dad, I want to talk to you about something, and I need you to really hear me, okay? He looked up, wary. Okay, I know you go to the garage every morning, I said gently. I know you talk to Mom there, and I want you to know that it's okay. You don't have to hide it from me. His face went through several expressions: surprise, embarrassment, defensiveness before settling into something resigned. You've been watching me. I saw it by accident, I said. And then yes, I watched once because I was worried about you. But I'm not judging you, Dad. I'm not concerned that you're losing it or anything like that. I want you to know that you can talk about her around me. You can say her name. You can tell me you miss her. You don't have to pretend to be okay all the time. He was quiet for a long time, his hands folded on the table in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. It's easier in the garage. I don't have to see you trying not to cry. I don't have to worry about making you sad. But I'm sad anyway, I said. We're both sad. We lost her. And pretending we're not grieving doesn't make the grief go away. I know that, he said. But those conversations, they're mine. They're private. And I need them to be private. Can you understand that? I nodded. I can understand that. But I need you to understand something too. You're not alone. You have me. You have Julia. You have people who love you and want to support you. And keeping everything locked inside, keeping yourself separate, it's not healthy. It's not sustainable. I'm not keeping everything inside, he said. I'm just trying to keep going. The same way I've always done. One day at a time. And talking to Mom helps with that, I said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, he admitted. It does. We sat in silence for a while. The TV was playing some home improvement show, the hosts enthusiastically discussing tile options. It seemed absurd, this cheerful domesticity playing out on screen while we sat with our grief between us. Like a living thing. Can I ask you something? I said. What do you talk to her about? He looked at me for a long moment, deciding whether to answer. Everything, he finally said. The weather, what happened at work, what you're doing, how proud she'd be of you, how much I miss her, just everything. The same stuff we talked about when she was alive. Does it help? Does it feel like she's really there? He shook his head. No, I know she's not there. I'm not confused about that. But saying the words out loud, telling her things, that makes me feel less alone. It makes me feel like part of her is still here, even if I know that's not really true. I reached across the table and took his hand. He looked surprised. Physical affection wasn't common between us, but he didn't pull away. I miss her too, I said, every single day. And sometimes I talk to her too, usually in my head, but sometimes out loud when I'm alone. So I understand. I really do. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry I've been distant. I'm sorry if I made you feel like you couldn't talk about her. I'm sorry too, I said. I'm sorry if I've been so focused on trying to hold it together that I haven't let you see how much I'm struggling too. We sat there holding hands across the table, two people who loved each other but had been so focused on protecting each other from pain that we'd ended up isolated in our separate griefs. It wasn't a dramatic moment of breakthrough or healing. It was just a small acknowledgement, a tiny step toward being more honest with each other. After that conversation, things shifted between us. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Dad still went to the garage every morning. I continued to see it on the security footage. But he seemed less guarded at home. He started mentioning Mom more often. Small things, your mother would have loved this weather, or this was your mother's recipe. Comments that had been absent before, as if by speaking to her in the garage every morning, he'd been trying to keep her memory contained there, separate from the rest of his life. Now he let her memory exist in the house again, in our conversations, in the natural flow of daily life. And I did the same. I started talking about her more freely, sharing memories, telling him stories from my childhood that involved her. We looked through old photo albums together one Sunday afternoon, laughing at outdated hairstyles and fashion choices, crying at pictures of happy moments we'd never get back. But I also started noticing other things, small things that concerned me. Dad seemed more tired than usual. He'd come home from work and fall asleep in his chair during dinner. He'd lost weight, not a lot, but enough that his clothes hung a little looser. He was rubbing his chest sometimes, absently, like something bothered him. When I asked if he was feeling okay, he brushed it off. Just getting old, he said. Everything hurts when you're my age. But I wasn't convinced. I started paying closer attention. The chest rubbing became more frequent. He was taking antacids constantly. And one evening, I caught him standing in the kitchen gripping the counter, his face pale and drawn. Dad, I approached him carefully. What's wrong? Nothing, he said, but his voice was strained. Just indigestion. That's not indigestion, I said firmly. We're going to there. I'm fine, he insisted. It'll pass, Dad, please. Just let me take you to get checked out. For my peace of mind, if nothing else. He finally agreed, more to stop me from worrying than out of any real concern for himself. We drove to the hospital in silence, him staring out the window, me gripping the steering wheel and trying not to cut Astro PHIZE in the emergency room. They ran tests, EKG, blood work, the whole battery of cardiac assessments. And when the doctor came back, her face was serious. Mr. Patterson, you've had a heart attack, she said. A minor one, but a heart attack nonetheless. And given your symptoms over the past few weeks, I suspect this isn't the first. We need to keep you here for observation and run more tests. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. How minor? I asked. Minor enough that he's walking and talking, the doctor said, but serious enough that we need to act now. We'll likely need to do a catheterization, possibly place a stent depending on what we find. My father looked shocked, like this possibility had never occurred to him. I can't stay, he said. I have work tomorrow. Work can wait, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. You're staying. The doctor excused herself to make arrangements. I sat down in the chair next to Dad's hospital bed, my hands shaking. How long had this been going on? How long had he been having chest pains and just powering through them? Too stubborn or too proud or too focused on maintaining his routine? To acknowledge that something was seriously wrong? Were you ever going to tell me? I asked. Or were you just planning to work until you dropped dead? I didn't know, he said quietly. I thought it was heartburn. I thought I was just tired. For weeks. You've been feeling like this for weeks, and you didn't think to get it checked. He didn't answer. Just looked at his hands, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen him. They kept him in the hospital for 3 days. The catheterization showed significant blockage in 2 arteries. They placed stents. The cardiologist explained that he'd need medication, dietary changes, exercise, stress reduction. That he'd been lucky this could have been fatal, but caught in time, with proper management, he could still live a long life. Julia drove down when I called her with the news. She sat with me in the waiting room during the procedure. Both of us pretending to read magazines while actually just staring at the same pages over and over. He's going to be okay, she said, more to herself than to me. He has to be, I replied. When they finally let us see him in recovery, he looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs. But his color was better. His breathing was easier. And when he saw us, he managed a weak smile. Told you I was fine, he said. You're an idiot, Julia told him, but her voice was thick with tears. A stubborn, impossible idiot. Runs in the family, he replied. Over the next few weeks, Dad's recovery became my full-time job, making sure he took his medications on time. Preparing heart-healthy meals even though he complained about the lack of salt and butter. Going with him to cardiac rehab appointments. Monitoring his activity levels. Making sure he didn't try to rush back to work before he was cleared. He chafed against the restrictions, against the constant supervision. I'm not an invalid, he grumbled more than once. No, but you're recovering from a heart attack. I'd respond, so deal with it. His morning routine had to change. The cardiologist recommended light exercise walking. Nothing strenuous, so his early wake-ups now involved a walk around the neighborhood. Instead of heading to work, work itself had to wait until he was fully recovered and cleared for the physical demands of a construction site, which meant no trips to the garage. No morning conversations with Mom. I watched him struggle with that loss. He'd become irritable, withdrawn, not dramatically, but I could see the strain. He missed his private time, his ritual, his connection to the woman he'd lost. One morning, about 3 weeks into his recovery, I found him sitting in the garage at 6 a.m. I'd woken up and realized he wasn't in the house. And I'd panicked, thinking he'd collapsed somewhere. But he was just sitting on his stool, in his spot, the coffee mug on the workbench next to him. Dad? I said softly from the doorway. He looked up, and I could see he'd been crying. His eyes were red, his face blotchy. I couldn't do it anymore, he said. I couldn't go another day without talking to her. I walked over and sat down on the concrete floor next to him. Tell me about her. Tell me what you miss most. He looked surprised. You want to hear this? I do, I said. I really do. So he told me. He told me about how they'd met at a community college dance when they were both 19. How she'd been wearing a yellow dress and laughing with her friends. And he'd been too shy to approach her until his roommate physically pushed him in her direction. How their first conversation had been about nothing important, the bad DJ, the warm beer. Their shared hatred of their English professor, but had lasted until the dance ended, and the janitors started turning off lights. He told me about their early years of marriage, when they were broke and living in a tiny apartment and eating ramen more nights than not. How they'd been happy anyway, because they had each other, and that had been enough. How they'd scrimped and saved to buy their first house, this house, and how she'd cried when they signed the papers, because it had felt like such an impossible dream achieved. He told me about the day I was born, how he'd been terrified he'd be a terrible father, how Mom had laughed and handed me to him and said you'll figure it out, how he'd held me and felt this overwhelming sense of responsibility and love that had never really gone away. He told me about her last day, how normal it had been, how she'd made him breakfast and kissed him goodbye and told him to have a good day at work, how he'd come home and found her in the garden and known immediately, known before he even checked her pulse, that she was gone, how he'd performed CPR anyway because giving up felt like betrayal, how he'd called 911 and answered their questions in a voice that didn't sound like his own, how the EMTs had gently told him what he already knew, that there was nothing they could do, nothing anyone could do, that her brain had simply stopped working and she died instantly, without pain, without fear, without any warning that this was her last morning. I didn't get to say goodbye, he said, his voice breaking. We didn't get to have those final conversations. I didn't get to tell her all the things I should have told her every day, but didn't because I thought we had time. I thought we had years. And then suddenly we didn't. And I was left with all these things I wanted to say, and no one to say them to. So you started saying them in the garage, I said softly. So I started saying them in the garage. He confirmed. Every morning before I face the day, I tell her the things I didn't get to tell her then. And I tell her about now, about what's happening, about how you're doing. I keep her updated, like she's just away on a trip, and I'm sending her postcards. We sat in silence for a while. The morning light was creeping through the window, catching dust motes in the air. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up, distant sounds of cars starting, dogs barking, the general hum of life continuing. You know what I think. I said, I think she knows. I think somehow, wherever she is, she knows you're still talking to her, and I think she loves you for it. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You think so? I know so, I said, because that's the kind of love you two had, the kind that doesn't end just because one person is gone, the kind that lasts. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder. That same gesture he'd made the morning this all started. But now I understood the weight behind it, the gratitude, the love, the relief of not having to carry everything alone. After that morning, I made a point of getting up early with him. Not every day. He still needed his private time, his space to talk to Mom without an audience. But sometimes I'd sit with him in the garage, and he'd talk about her, and I'd share my own memories. And together, we'd keep her present in our lives in a way that felt healthy rather than pathological. His recovery continued. Slowly, steadily, he regained his strength. The cardiologist eventually cleared him to return to work, with modifications. No more 60-hour weeks. No more physically demanding labor. He transitioned to more of an oversight role, managing projects from the office rather than on-site. He grumbled about it at first. My father was a man who liked to work with his hands, who took pride in physical labor, but he adjusted. And he started taking better care of himself, actually taking his medications, actually following the dietary guidelines, actually exercising regularly. Because, he told me one evening, he'd realized during those days in the hospital that he wasn't ready to die, that there were still things he wanted to do, still life he wanted to live, and he couldn't do any of that if he was dead. Plus, he added, if I died, who'd take care of you? I'm 29 years old, I pointed out. I can take care of myself. Can you? He asked, but he was smiling. You moved back home because you couldn't take care of yourself. I moved back home because I needed a break, I corrected. There's a difference. Sure there is, he said, still smiling. The truth was, we were taking care of each other. That's what family did. That's what love looked like, not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the daily showing up, the making of coffee and the monitoring of medications and the sharing of meals and memories. The sitting together in garages having conversations with people who weren't there, keeping them alive through the simple act of refusing to forget. Spring came, and with it the anniversary of Mom's death. 4 years since that morning in the garden, Dad and I spent the day together, visiting her grave, planting flowers, talking about her. It was sad but not devastating, painful but not unbearable. We learned to carry the grief without letting it crush us. That evening, we sat on the back porch watching the sunset. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and blooming lilacs. Birds were singing their evening songs. Everything was alive and growing and beautiful in that particular way spring has of reminding you that life continues, that endings lead to beginnings, that even after the longest winter, warmth returns. I've been thinking, Dad said, breaking the comfortable silence, about selling the house. I looked at him, surprised. Really? It's too big for just me, he said, and there are too many memories here. Good ones, but still. I think maybe it's time for something new, smaller, easier to maintain. What about your morning conversations? I asked, with Mom, in the garage. He smiled. I can talk to her anywhere. I don't need that specific garage. I just need a quiet place in a few minutes. That's all I've ever needed. So you're really okay with moving? I think I am, he said. I think it's time. And besides, you can't live here forever. You need to get back out there, start your life again. You're too young to be babysitting your old man. I'm not babysitting, I protested. I'm living with my father while I figure out my next move. There's a difference, is there? He asked, echoing my words from earlier, still with that small smile. The truth was, I had been thinking about my next move, about finding my own place again, about dating, maybe when I felt ready, about pursuing the kind of work that fed my soul rather than just paid my bills, about building a life that felt authentic and meaningful and mine. But I'd also been thinking about how much I'd gained from these months living with my father, how I'd learned to slow down, to appreciate routine, to find meaning in small daily rituals, how I'd discovered depths to my father I'd never known existed, not just his grief, but his capacity for sustained love, his dedication to maintaining connection even across the barrier of death. How I'd learned that sometimes moving backward is necessary before you can move forward, that there's no shame in needing help, in taking time, in letting yourself be supported by people who love you. That family isn't just the people you're related to by blood, but the people who show up for you when you need them, who make space for you in their lives, who help you carry the weight of your grief and your failures and your fears. We'll figure it out, I said. Both of us, together. He nodded, satisfied. We sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The day ending, as all days do, but not disappearing, just transforming into memory, joining all the other days that had come before, becoming part of the story we'd tell about this time in our lives. The coffee mug sat on the porch railing between us. That faded garden scene barely visible in the dimming light. Dad had brought it out from the garage, a small gesture, but a significant one. He was letting Mom's memory exist in the open air, in the shared spaces of our lives, rather than keeping her contained in that private morning ritual. She'd be proud of you, I said, of how you've handled all of this. The grief, the heart attack, everything. She'd be proud of you too, he replied. Coming home when you needed to, taking care of me, not giving up even when things got hard. I learned that from you, I said. The not giving up part. Well, he said with a slight smile. Then I guess I did something right. The stars were coming out now, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Constant, distant, unchanged by whatever dramas played out beneath them. It was comforting somehow, that continuity. The reminder that our small human struggles happened against a backdrop of something vast and eternal and indifferent in the best possible way, not cruel. Just existing, providing context and perspective. We sat until the mosquitoes drove us inside. Dad went to bed early. He was still recovering, still rebuilding his strength. I stayed up, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, scrolling through apartment listings and job postings, beginning the process of imagining what came next. But I wasn't in a hurry. I had learned something from my father's morning ritual, from his dedication to those private conversations, from his refusal to let go of love even when the person he loved was gone. I had learned that healing doesn't follow a timeline, that there's no schedule for grief or recovery or rebuilding your life, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply continue, to get up each morning and face the day, to find meaning in routine and connection in ritual, to talk to the people you love, whether they're present or not, and to keep them alive through the simple act of remembering. I closed my laptop and went upstairs, paused outside my father's bedroom door and heard the soft sound of his snoring. Steady, alive, still here. In my own room. I lay in bed thinking about the security camera footage that had started all of this. How I'd been looking for something innocuous evidence of raccoons, and had instead discovered a secret that had reshaped my understanding of my father, my family, my own capacity for grief and love and resilience. Life had a way of showing you things when you were ready to see them, not before, when the revelation would be too overwhelming, but exactly when you needed it. I discovered my father's morning conversations at the precise moment when I was capable of understanding them, of recognizing them for what they were, not a sign of mental deterioration or inability to cope, but evidence of profound love sustained across an impossible distance. And in understanding that, I had begun to understand something about my own grief, my own losses, my own need to maintain connections even when circumstances had severed them. I had lost a career I'd thought defined me. I had lost a relationship I believed was permanent. I had lost my mother, my sense of direction, my confidence in my own judgment. But I'd found something too. Here in this house with my father, I had found that love persists, that family shows up, that there's strength in vulnerability and courage in continuing even when you don't know what comes next. The last thing I did before falling asleep was text Julia. Dad's doing well. We're doing well. Thanks for everything, she responded almost immediately. Love you both. Always here if you need me. Simple words, but they contained universes, the promise of continued presence. The assurance that even when we were living separate lives in separate places, we were still connected, still family, still there for each other across whatever distances intervened. I fell asleep thinking about coffee mugs and morning rituals, and the way love refuses to be contained by the boundaries we try to impose on it. how it spills over into unexpected places, early morning garages, security camera footage, the careful monitoring of cardiac medications, the sharing of memories over cold pot roast. How it persists not in grand gestures, but in tiny daily acts of attention and care. My father's morning conversations with my mother taught me that love doesn't end when someone leaves. It just changes form. It becomes memory and ritual and the determined effort to keep a connection alive, even when logic says it's impossible. And maybe that's the most powerful form of love, the kind that exists despite absence, that survives loss, that chooses presence even when the other person can't be physically present anymore. In the morning, I'd wake up and make coffee. Dad would come downstairs and we'd move through our routine. He might go to the garage to talk to Mom, or he might not. Either way, she'd be there with us, in the coffee mug on the counter, in the photos on the mantle, in the memories we shared, and the love that had shaped us both into who we were. And that would be enough. It would have to be enough. Because in the end, that's all any of us has: the love we give and receive, the memories we create and preserve, the daily choice to show up for each other even when it's hard, even when we're tired, even when we're not sure what comes next. The security camera would keep recording. Life would keep moving forward. But I'd learned something from that footage, from those secret morning conversations, from the revelation that had started with confusion and ended with understanding. I'd learned that the people we love never really leave us. They live on in our daily rituals, in our private conversations, in the way we move through the world, carrying their influence like a compass pointing true north. And that's not delusion or denial. That's love doing what love does, persisting, enduring, refusing to be bound by the limitations of time or space or mortality. My father knew that, had known it for 4 years. And now I knew it too. And in that knowing, in that shared understanding, we found a way to move forward together, not forgetting, not leaving behind, but carrying our grief and our love with us into whatever came next. Two people learning to live with loss, finding meaning in ritual, discovering that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply continue the conversation, even when you're the only one speaking, even when no one answers back, even when all you have is love and memory and the stubborn refusal to let go. Because some conversations are too important to end. Some love is too powerful to be silenced by something as simple as death. And some mornings, in the quiet hours before the world wakes up, you need to sit in a garage with a coffee mug and talk to the person who shaped your life, who taught you how to love, who left too soon, but left you with everything you needed to keep going. And that's not strange or sad or concerning. That's beautiful. That's human. That's what it looks like when love refuses to end, when memory becomes ritual, when grief transforms into something that sustains rather than destroys. That's what my father understood, sitting on his 3-legged stool in that cluttered garage every morning. And that's what I learned from watching him, from sitting beside him, from listening to him talk to someone who wasn't there, but somehow was present in the speaking, alive in the remembering, eternal in the love that refused to let her go.